The rain hadn't let up all morning. It drummed against the courthouse roof like 1,000 impatient fingers, steady and gray, matching the mood inside courtroom 3. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale, tired glow on scuffed wooden benches and a judge's bench that had seen better decades. The air smelled faintly of old paper, stale coffee, and the kind of boredom that settles in when justice moves at the pace of bureaucracy. A handful of people sat scattered in the gallery, mostly folks waiting for their own cases. A couple of law students scribbling notes and one reporter who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. At the plaintiff's table sat a man most would overlook at first glance. He wore faded fatigues that had clearly seen years of wear, not for show, but because they were comfortable and still held together. His boots were muddy at the soles, his ball cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried a duffel bag instead of a briefcase, and when he walked, there was a slight hitch in his step, a quiet reminder of something carried long after the battlefield was left behind. He'd come to fight an eviction. Not his first brush with hardship, but this one felt personal. The landlord, a well-connected local businessman with a reputation for squeezing tenants until they cracked, had filed to remove him from a small apartment he'd lived in for nearly 3 years. The reasons given were flimsy: chronic noise complaints and failure to maintain premises. But neighbors knew the truth. He'd started asking questions after rent hikes hit triple digits overnight. He'd helped an elderly woman next door file a complaint about mold the landlord refused to fix. And just like that, he was on the list. The bailiff called the case. The judge entered, a man in his late 50s with sharp eyes and sharper impatience. He'd been on the bench long enough to develop a practiced eye for what he called frivolous filings, and self-represented litigants, especially those who looked like they'd just walked in from a campsite, rarely impressed him. He scanned the docket, then glanced at the man in fatigues. A dry chuckle escaped him. "Let me guess," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Another veteran who thinks reading a few pages of tenant rights online makes him Perry Mason?" A few nervous laughs rippled through the gallery. The landlord's attorney, a polished man in a tailored suit, smiled into his coffee cup. The veteran didn't react. He simply placed a worn legal pad on the table, its edges frayed, pages filled with neat, precise handwriting. He didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He just waited. "State your name for the record," the judge said, already flipping to the next case in his mind. The veteran spoke quietly but clearly. "Sir, I'm here representing myself in the matter of—" "Save your theatrics for the VFW hall, son," the judge cut in, waving a hand. "We've got a docket to clear. You've got 5 minutes to make your point, and I suggest you stick to facts, not conspiracy theories." The words landed like stones, but the man didn't argue. He nodded once as if he'd expected nothing less. He took a slow breath, opened his pad, and began. He spoke about the lease agreement, specifically Section 4B, which prohibited rent increases without 60 days written notice. He mentioned that the notice he received was hand-delivered with no timestamp, no signature, and bore a typo in the property address. He pulled out a copy, yellowed at the edges, and laid it on the table. The judge barely glanced at it. "That's standard procedure," he said dismissively. "Landlords make clerical errors all the time. Doesn't void the notice, but it does," the veteran replied gently, "under Municipal Code 22-189, subsection C, which states that any notice lacking verifiable delivery is null and void." The judge paused. "That wasn't something you picked up from a YouTube video." He frowned slightly but said nothing. The veteran continued. He described how, after he'd asked for repairs to a leaking ceiling, repairs that led to black mold spreading into the hallway, the landlord suddenly claimed he'd violated the quiet enjoyment clause. Yet no formal complaints had ever been filed with the building inspector. No police reports, nothing. Just a sudden, aggressive push to get him out. He reached into his duffel and produced a folder. Inside were signed statements from 5 neighbors, 2 elderly women, a single mother, a retired teacher, and a college student, all confirming they'd never heard excessive noise from his unit. One even wrote that he'd fixed her porch light when it went out last winter. The judge shifted in his seat. This wasn't the usual rambling, emotional plea he was used to. This was organized, methodical, almost professional. "Your Honor," the veteran said, "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for the law to be applied equally. I paid my rent on time. I reported hazards through proper channels. and now I'm being punished for it. The landlord's attorney finally stood. Objection. The defendant is speculating about motive. There's no evidence of retaliation. Sustained, the judge said quickly, though his tone lacked its earlier sharpness. He looked at the veteran again, this time with something closer to curiosity. You've clearly done your homework, but representing yourself in court is risky. You understand that, right? I do, sir, the veteran replied. But sometimes when no one else will stand up, you have to stand for yourself. The room grew quiet. Even the rain seemed to soften outside. Then the judge leaned forward. All right. Make your opening statement. Properly this time, the veteran nodded. He straightened his cap, cleared his throat, and began again. This time with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, even if no one else did yet. He spoke of contract law, of tenant protections, of the difference between legal technicalities and real justice. He cited a recent state Supreme Court ruling about retaliatory evictions. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply laid out the facts like pieces of a puzzle, trusting the picture would become clear. Halfway through, the judge interrupted, not to cut him off, but to ask a question. Where did you read that case? The State Reporter, Volume 317, the veteran said without hesitation. Page 42, the judge blinked. He turned to his clerk, who quickly pulled up the database. A moment later, she gave a small nod. The judge sat back. His expression had changed. The smirk was gone. In its place was something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Inside, something else was shifting. Slowly, quietly, like the first crack in a wall no one thought could fall. And the man in fatigues? He just kept talking, one clear sentence at a time, as if he'd been doing this his whole life. The courtroom felt different now, not because the lights had changed or the benches had magically become more comfortable, but because something had shifted in the air. The judge sat a little straighter. The landlord's attorney kept glancing at his notes like they might suddenly offer an escape route. Even the reporter in the back stopped doodling and started writing in earnest. The veteran didn't seem to notice any of it. He just kept going, calm and steady, like a river carving its path through stone. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply laying out what was true. He turned next to the issue of repairs, or rather the lack of them. Your Honor, he said, the landlord claims the unit was maintained to code, but on March 12th, I submitted a written request for ceiling repairs after a pipe burst during a storm. That request was never acknowledged. On April 3rd, I followed up with a certified letter. Still no response. He pulled out a copy of the letter, stamped and dated, and handed it to the bailiff. Then he produced photos, clear, well-lit shots of water stains spreading across the ceiling, black mold creeping down the wall beside the bedroom door. One photo showed a bucket placed under a steady drip. These conditions violate Health and Safety Code Section 1179923, he continued. Specifically, the presence of visible mold in a dwelling unit constitutes a substandard condition. The landlord is legally required to remediate it within 30 days of notice. The judge flipped through the documents. And you never got a reply? Not a word, the veteran said. But 2 weeks after I sent that letter, I received the eviction notice. A murmur passed through the small crowd. The landlord's attorney stood quickly. Your Honor, correlation isn't causation. My client has dozens of properties. Delays happen. This is a routine eviction, not retaliation. Routine? The veteran asked, turning slightly. Then why did your client text my neighbor last month saying, "Tell him to stop asking questions or he's next"? The room went still. The attorney's face paled. That's hearsay. It's not, the veteran said. I have the text message, printed, time-stamped, and verified through the carrier. He reached into his duffel again and handed another sheet to the bailiff. The neighbor gave me permission to use it. She's here, if you'd like her to testify. The judge studied the printout. His jaw tightened. He looked at the landlord's attorney. Did you know about this? The attorney hesitated just a second too long. I wasn't aware of any communication like that. The judge exhaled through his nose. He turned back to the veteran. You've presented documentation I haven't seen in most attorney-filed cases. Where did you learn to do this? The veteran didn't smile. He didn't boast. I used to work with the law, he said simply. Before I served overseas, I studied it. After I came back, I kept studying, just never practiced in a firm. That answer hung in the air, vague enough to raise eyebrows, specific enough to stir suspicion. The young public defender sitting near the front pulled out her phone under the bench and typed quickly into the State Bar's public directory. A few seconds later, her eyes widened. She nudged the clerk beside her and showed her the screen. The clerk's mouth fell open just slightly. Back at the plaintiff's table, the veteran moved on. He called his first witness, an elderly woman who lived across the hall. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, but her voice was strong when she spoke. She confirmed the mold, the leaks, the veteran's quiet help fixing her door lock when it jammed. He never asked for anything, she said. Just said, if you need anything, knock. That's more than I can say for the man who owns this building. The landlord's attorney tried to poke holes in her testimony, but she held firm. When he asked if she'd ever heard loud noises from the veteran's apartment, she laughed softly. Only sound I ever heard was him playing piano late at night. Soft, sad music. Sounded like he was talking to ghosts. The judge made a note. The reporter scribbled faster. Next came the college student, a quiet young man with tired eyes. He testified that after his car broke down, the veteran lent him tools and stayed up past midnight helping him fix the alternator. He didn't even know me, the student said, just saw me struggling and walked over. One by one, the witnesses painted a picture not of a troublemaker, but of someone who quietly looked out for others, even as his own world was being pulled out from under him. Then came the legal knockout. The veteran referenced a recent appellate decision, Hernandez v. Crestwood Properties, a case so new it hadn't even been widely reported yet. He quoted the ruling verbatim. A landlord's failure to respond to documented health hazards followed by an eviction notice against the reporting tenant creates a rebuttable presumption of retaliatory intent. The judge froze. He turned to his law clerk. Pull up Hernandez. The clerk typed rapidly. A moment later, she nodded. It's real, Your Honor. Decided 6 weeks ago. The judge stared at the veteran. You cited that from memory? Yes, sir. How? The veteran met his gaze. I read every housing decision that comes out of this district. It's how I stay sharp. The landlord's attorney asked for a recess. His voice was tight, his usual confidence gone. The judge granted it without hesitation. As people milled about in the hallway, whispers spread. Who was this guy? Someone mentioned he'd seen him at the food bank last winter, helping load boxes. Another recalled him tutoring kids at the community center. No one had ever seen him in a suit. No one knew he knew the law like this. Inside the courtroom, the judge sat alone for a moment, staring at the stack of documents on his bench. He'd mocked a man who turned out to be more prepared than half the lawyers who walked through his doors. Worse, he'd almost let bias blind him to a clear case of injustice. When court reconvened, the veteran didn't gloat. He didn't even look triumphant. He simply stood, adjusted his cap, and said, I'd like to submit one more exhibit, Your Honor. It was a spreadsheet, meticulously organized, listing every tenant in the building who'd been evicted or pressured to leave in the past 18 months. Each name had dates, reasons given, and notes on whether they'd complained about repairs beforehand. Nearly all of them had. This isn't just about me, the veteran said quietly. It's about a pattern. The judge didn't interrupt. He listened. And for the first time that day, he truly heard. Outside, the clouds had parted. A sliver of sunlight cut through the courthouse windows, landing right on the worn cover of the veteran's legal pad, as if the light itself wanted to bear witness. The recess didn't last long, but it felt like an eternity to everyone in the room. Outside the courtroom, people huddled in low conversation, glancing toward the double doors like something important was about to walk through them. Inside, the veteran sat alone at the plaintiff's table, calmly flipping through his notes as if he hadn't just turned the entire proceeding on its head. The judge returned first, his expression unreadable. He took his seat slowly, adjusted his robe, and stared at the empty witness chair for a long moment before speaking. "Before we continue," he said, his voice quieter than before, "I need to ask you something directly." The veteran looked up. "Yes, Your Honor." "Are you a licensed attorney?" A hush fell over the gallery. Even the bailiff stopped shuffling papers. The veteran didn't hesitate. "Yes, I am." The judge leaned forward slightly. "You never identified yourself as counsel. You filed as a self-represented litigant." "That's correct," the veteran replied. "I'm representing myself in this matter as a private citizen. I didn't think my professional background was relevant until it became necessary to establish credibility." "Necessary?" the judge repeated, eyebrows raised. "You cited a case so new most lawyers haven't read it. You've produced documentation that would make a seasoned paralegal proud, and you just handed me a spreadsheet that looks like it came out of a law firm's discovery department." The veteran nodded. "I understand how it appears, but I'm not here to practice law. I'm here because I was wrongfully targeted. The law is the law, whether you wear a suit or fatigues." The judge studied him for a long moment. Then, he asked, "Can you prove you're licensed?" Without a word, the veteran reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, not the duffel this time, and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he removed a laminated card and handed it to the bailiff. The bailiff passed it to the judge. The room held its breath. The judge examined the card carefully. It bore a state bar number, an issue date from over a decade ago, and a photo. That matched the man before him. Though back then his hair was shorter, his face less weathered, his eyes not yet carrying the weight of what he'd seen. The judge typed the number into the court's secure terminal. A few seconds later, the screen confirmed it. Active status, no disciplinary record, good standing. He exhaled slowly. "You've maintained your license all this time, but never." "Practiced?" "I never stopped practicing," the veteran said gently. "Just not in courtrooms like this. Not for billable hours or firm rankings." He paused, then added, "After I came home from deployment, I couldn't go back to the kind of law that served only those who could afford it. So I stayed quiet, helped neighbors fill out forms, wrote letters for veterans struggling with benefits, reviewed leases for single moms getting pushed out of their apartments. No fanfare, no fees, just what needed doing." A woman in the back wiped her eyes with her sleeve. The young public defender sat up straighter, as if she'd just been handed a new compass. The judge set the bar card down carefully, as if it were fragile. "You understand that by not disclosing your status, you risked being seen as deceptive." "I understand," the veteran said. "But if I'd walked in here as attorney so-and-so, this case would have been treated differently from the start. The landlord's team would have prepared harder. You might have assumed I was playing games. But as just another veteran fighting to keep a roof over his head, that's the truth too. And sometimes truth speaks louder when it's not dressed in a title." The judge was silent for a long time. Then, to everyone's surprise, he said, "You're right. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was close. Close enough that the tension in the room softened, just a little." Court resumed. This time, the judge addressed the veteran as counsel, even though he wasn't officially representing anyone but himself. The landlord's attorney, now visibly rattled, tried to regroup, but his arguments sounded thin against the mountain of evidence already presented. Then came the testimony no one expected. An older man in a postal uniform stepped forward. He'd been sitting in the back the whole time, unnoticed. "I deliver mail in that building," he said. "For 12 years. I've seen landlords come and go, but this one..." He shook his head. "He told me once, tenants are like light bulbs. When they burn out, you just replace them." He looked at the veteran. "But this one, he's the kind who fixes the socket." The judge made a note. The reporter's pen didn't stop moving. Later, during cross-examination, the landlord's attorney finally cracked. "Your Honor, this is turning into a public shaming, not a legal proceeding." "Is it?" the judge asked coolly. "Because from where I sit, it's looking more like accountability." The veteran didn't press further. He didn't need to. The pieces were all on the table now. The pattern was clear, the retaliation was real, and the man everyone had dismissed as just another down-on-his-luck veteran had quietly built a case so solid it couldn't be ignored. As the afternoon light slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the courtroom floor, the veteran gathered his papers. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired, but peaceful, like someone who'd carried a heavy truth for a long time and finally set it down where it belonged. And in that moment something shifted, not just in the case but in the room itself. People sat up straighter. They listened more closely. They remembered that justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears old boots and speaks in simple words. The judge adjourned for the day, but everyone knew the real verdict was already forming. Not just in the law books, but in the hearts of those who'd witnessed what happens when dignity meets determination. The courtroom felt different the next morning. Not just because the sun was shining through the tall windows or because more people had shown up to watch. It was the quiet kind of change, the kind that happens when respect replaces assumption. Even the bailiff nodded slightly as the veteran walked in, duffel bag over his shoulder, same worn fatigues, same calm step. The judge entered without his usual brisk stride. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the room. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to say something on the record." He paused, cleared his throat. "Yesterday I made a comment that was unprofessional and unfair. I judged a litigant by his appearance, not his arguments. That was a failure on my part, and I apologize." The words landed softly but firmly. No grand speech, no dramatic bow. Just a man owning his mistake. The veteran gave a small nod. That was enough. The landlord's attorney, looking like he hadn't slept, stood quickly. "Your Honor, my client would like to discuss a possible settlement." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Yes," the attorney said, avoiding eye contact with the veteran. "We believe there may have been misunderstandings in how the property was managed." The veteran didn't interrupt. He just waited. The judge turned to him. "Counsel, what's your position?" "I'm not interested in a private settlement," the veteran said. "Not just for me. If we settle quietly, nothing changes for the others. The mold stays. The illegal fees keep piling up. The next tenant who asks for repairs gets pushed out too." He leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about money. It's about making sure the law means something for everyone, not just those who can hire a lawyer." The judge nodded slowly. "Then we proceed." What followed wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic showdown. It was something quieter, sharper, precision. The veteran walked through the landlord's business records, obtained through a public records request he'd filed weeks ago, and pointed out forged signatures on lease addendums, late fees that violated state caps, and a pattern of targeting tenants who'd filed complaints with the housing authority. One document in particular drew gasps, an internal email from the landlord's property manager saying, if they won't pay the convenience fee, hit them with the noise violation. Works every time. The landlord's attorney tried to object, but the judge overruled him. It's relevant, and it's damning. Then came the testimony from the building inspector, a no-nonsense woman who'd been trying to get the landlord to fix code violations for over a year. "We issued 3 formal notices," she said, all ignored. "We even recommended criminal referral for willful neglect of health hazards." "Nothing happened. Why not?" the judge asked. She gave a dry laugh. "Money talks, Your Honor. His lawyer always shows up, promises fixes next month, and the case gets delayed. By then, the tenant's usually gone." The veteran didn't need to say another word. The system had been working exactly as designed, for the powerful, not the people. But today was different. During a short break, a woman from the gallery approached the veteran. She was in her 60s, hands trembling slightly. "I lived in that building last year," she whispered. "They evicted me after I complained about no heat in winter. I didn't know I could fight back." He looked at her gently. "You can still file a claim for wrongful eviction. The statute of limitations hasn't run out." She blinked back tears. "I didn't think anyone would listen." "Someone's listening now," he said. Back in court, the veteran made his closing argument. He didn't pace. He didn't raise his voice. He stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the wood, and spoke like he was talking to a neighbor over a fence. "Your Honor, the law isn't a weapon for the rich to use against the poor. It's a promise that everyone, no matter their uniform or their bank account, deserves fair treatment." This landlord broke that promise not once, over and over. He glanced at the gallery where a dozen faces, tenants, neighbors, strangers who'd heard the story, sat watching. If we let this slide, we tell them their rights don't matter. But if we hold him accountable, not just to me but to every tenant he's hurt, then maybe that promise means something again. The landlord's attorney barely stood for his closing. He mumbled something about procedural errors and overreach, but his heart wasn't in it. Everyone knew the case was lost. The judge didn't rule from the bench right away. He said he needed time to review the evidence. But as he gathered his notes, he looked at the veteran and said, "You've made your point clearly." Outside, the news had spread. A local TV crew waited on the courthouse steps, but the veteran slipped out a side door. He didn't want cameras. He never had. That evening, in a small office at the Legal Aid Center downtown, the young public defender sat with the courthouse clerk, going over files. He could have been a partner at a top firm, she said, shaking her head. Why walk away from all that? The clerk shrugged. Maybe he realized the real work wasn't in the boardrooms. It was here, in places people forget. Back at his apartment, the one he was still fighting to keep, the veteran sat at his kitchen table, reviewing a letter for a disabled veteran down the street who'd been denied benefits. The TV played softly in the background, reporting on the case. He didn't listen. He just kept writing, pen moving steadily across the page, because for him this was never about winning in court. It was about making sure no one else had to stand alone. The ruling came on a Thursday morning just after 9. The courtroom was full, more full than it had been all week. Neighbors stood in the back. Reporters filled the first 2 rows. Even a few law students from the nearby university had shown up, notebooks open, pens ready. Everyone knew this wasn't just about one eviction anymore. It was about what kind of justice the system was willing to offer when the little guy finally stood his ground. The judge entered without fanfare. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked out at the room with a quiet seriousness that silenced even the rustle of papers. The court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and applicable law, he began. His voice was steady, clear, and it finds in favor of the defendant. A soft murmur rose, quickly hushed. The eviction notice issued on April 18th is hereby declared invalid, the judge continued. Furthermore, the court finds clear and convincing evidence of retaliatory intent in violation of state housing code and public policy. He went on to order the landlord to pay full reimbursement of all rent collected during the disputed period, plus damages for emotional distress and loss of quiet enjoyment. But then he did something unusual, something that made the veteran look up sharply. In addition, the judge said, the court orders the defendant landlord to undergo mandatory compliance training with the city's housing authority within 60 days, and to issue refunds plus interest for all illegal late fees and convenience charges collected from tenants in the subject building over the past 2 years. The gallery stirred. That wasn't standard. That was accountability. The landlord's attorney opened his mouth to object, but the judge held up a hand. This isn't punishment. It's correction. The law exists to protect people, not loopholes. When court adjourned, people didn't rush out. They lingered. Some came forward to shake the veteran's hand. Others just stood nearby as if being close to him might remind them that fairness was still possible. He didn't give a speech. He didn't pose for photos. He simply packed his duffel bag, nodded to the bailiff, and walked out the side door again, same as before. But this time, something had changed. By the next week, the story had spread, not as a viral spectacle, but as a quiet ripple through the community. The local paper ran a front-page feature, not with dramatic headlines, but with a simple photo of the veteran helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries. The caption read, "When the law serves everyone." The legal aid office reported a surge in calls, not just from people needing help, but from volunteers wanting to learn. A retired teacher signed up to help translate forms for non-English speakers. A mechanic offered to fix cars for clients who couldn't afford transportation to court. Something had been awakened. Even the judge felt it. In his chambers one afternoon, he drafted a short memo to the county's judicial council. It proposed a new training module for judges and clerks on implicit bias, especially toward self-represented litigants, veterans, and low-income residents. He cited the recent case not as an example of brilliance but as a warning. Assumptions can blind us to justice. The memo was approved within a month. By fall, every new courthouse employee in the county would receive it as part of their orientation. As for the veteran, life returned to its usual rhythm, only now people knocked on his door not just for help with rent letters, but with disability claims, child custody forms, even small business permits. He never turned anyone away. He'd make tea, sit at his kitchen table, and listen. Then he'd pull out his legal pad and start writing. One evening, a boy from down the street, maybe 10 years old, stood on his porch holding a crumpled piece of paper. "My mom says you know about the law," the boy said shyly. "I know a little," the veteran replied, opening the screen door. "My school project's about heroes," the boy said, holding out the paper. "Can I write about you?" The veteran smiled but shook his head gently. "Heroes wear capes in stories. Real life's different. I'm just someone who believes the rules should work for everyone, not just the ones who can afford to play the game." The boy frowned. "But you stood up to that judge, and you won." "I didn't win," the veteran said. "The law won. I just reminded people it was there." The boy thought about that for a moment. Then he asked, "Were you really a lawyer?" The veteran looked out at the street. The same street where kids rode bikes, neighbors waved from porches, and streetlights flickered on at dusk. "I still am," he said, "just differently." Later that night, he sat on his porch under a sky full of stars. The city hummed in the distance, cars, distant music, the occasional bark of a dog. On his lap lay a new file, a Social Security appeal for a Vietnam veteran who'd been denied benefits for the third time. The man's handwriting was shaky, his words full of frustration and fear. The veteran opened his notebook, uncapped his pen, and began drafting a letter, not full of legal jargon, but plain English, clear and kind. He wrote about service, about dignity, about how a country that asks its people to risk everything should at least keep its promises when they come home. Inside the house, the old piano in the corner sat silent. But if you listened closely, you could almost hear the soft notes he used to play late at night. Melodies that sounded like memory, like healing, like hope. No cameras captured this moment. No headlines marked it. But in that quiet house on that ordinary street, justice wasn't a grand performance. It was a choice, made again and again, one person at a time, and sometimes that's enough to change everything.